The golden-caged Josephine Rivera adjusted her diamond earrings in the mirror, trying to ignore the hollow feeling expanding in her chest. The reflection staring back wore a designer gown that cost more than her former apartment's yearly rent. Her dark hair had been styled into an elegant updo that made her neck ache, and her makeup was flawless, just as Victor liked it. 5 minutes, Miss Rivera, called the event coordinator through the door. Mr. Kensington is waiting. Thank you, Josie replied, her voice barely audible even to herself. Tonight was her engagement party to Victor Kensington, 38-year-old real estate mogul and her family's salvation. 2 years ago, when her father's construction company faced bankruptcy, Victor had swept in with an offer too convenient to be coincidental. He'd rescued the business, provided her brothers with executive positions, and made it clear that Josie was part of the arrangement, though never in so many words. You look beautiful, her mother said, entering the room in a rustle of expensive fabric. Victor will be pleased, Josie nodded mechanically. He always prefers this shade of blue. That's why we chose it, her mother replied, adjusting Josie's necklace. Remember how fortunate we are, Majita. The Kensingtons have accepted us into their world, as if the Rivera family were immigrants to the land of wealth rather than business partners. As if Josie were an offering rather than a person. It's time, her mother said, squeezing Josie's hand. They walked through the corridor of the Kensington Estate's East Wing, the place that would become Josie's home after the wedding. The ballroom doors opened, revealing a sea of San Francisco's elite in formal attire, crystal champagne flutes catching the light from chandeliers. Victor stood at the center, immaculately dressed in a tailored tuxedo. At 38, he was handsome in a manufactured way. Perfect teeth, perfect hair, perfect posture. He smiled when he saw Josie, but the smile never reached his eyes. There she is, he announced, extending his hand toward her. The future Mrs. Kensington. The crowd applauded politely as Josie took her place beside him. His arm slipped around her waist, fingers pressing possessively against her hip. You're late, he whispered through his smile. I'm sorry, she replied automatically. The evening proceeded like a well-choreographed dance. Victor introduced her to people whose names blurred together, all of them appraising her like a new acquisition. She nodded and smiled until her face hurt, speaking only when spoken to. And what are your plans after the wedding, Josephine? Asked an older woman dripping in pearls. Before Josie could answer, Victor chuckled. She'll be busy enough managing our social calendar and charitable foundation. My wife won't need to work, my wife. Not my partner, not my equal. Something cracked inside Josie at that moment. Looking around the glittering ballroom, she suddenly saw her future with perfect clarity. A beautiful prison where she would slowly disappear. Excuse me, she murmured, pulling away from Victor's grip. I need some air. She walked toward the terrace doors, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. But instead of stopping at the balcony, Josephine Rivera kept walking, past surprised guests through the kitchen, out the service entrance, choosing freedom over a gilded cage. Starting from scratch, the tiny apartment in Oakland wasn't much. A studio with scuffed hardwood floors, a kitchenette barely big enough for a mini-fridge, and a window that faced a brick wall. But to Josie it represented something priceless. Independence. 3 weeks had passed since she'd walked out of the Kensington estate, leaving behind the diamond engagement ring on the passenger seat of her luxury car. Before abandoning that too, she'd taken nothing that Victor had given her, starting fresh with only the savings from her former job as an art teacher, a career she'd put on hold when Victor entered her life. Her phone buzzed again, her mother's 14th call today. Josie silenced it and continued unpacking her thrift store dishes. Her family had oscillated between fury and desperate pleading, but she remained resolute. Victor, meanwhile, had reacted predictably, first with cold anger, then by threatening her father's business, and finally by having his lawyer deliver paperwork demanding repayment for gifts given during their relationship. Not exactly Prince Charming after all, Josie muttered, placing a chipped mug on the shelf. Finding work had been harder than expected. Her resume showed a 2-year gap, and using her family connections was impossible now. After a week of rejections, she'd spotted a help wanted sign in the window of a small bookstore called Foxglove Books, in a quiet neighborhood. The owner, Patricia Daniels was a silver-haired woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. "Have you worked retail before?" she'd asked during the impromptu interview. "No, but I'm a quick learner," Josie had replied. "And I love books." Patricia had studied her for a long moment. "You're overqualified for this position, aren't you?" Josie had hesitated before answering honestly. "I'm rebuilding my life. I need somewhere to start." Something in Patricia's expression had softened. "We open at 9. Don't be late." Now 2 weeks into her new job, Josie felt more alive than she had in years. The bookstore was a haven of worn armchairs, carefully curated displays, and customers who valued substance over status. Her meager paycheck barely covered rent and groceries, but she slept soundly each night, unburdened by golden handcuffs. "Would you mind staying an extra hour today?" Patricia asked one Tuesday afternoon. "I have a doctor's appointment, but we're expecting a delivery." "Of course," Josie replied, genuinely happy to help. The afternoon passed quietly. Josie reorganized the poetry section, helped a teenager find LGBTQ+ fiction, and recommended her favorite magical realism novels to an elderly couple planning a trip to South America. Just before closing, the bell above the door chimed. "Sorry, we're about to close," Josie called without looking up from the register. "I only need a minute," replied a warm male voice. "I promised my niece a birthday gift and I'm completely lost." Josie looked up to see a man about her age, early 30s, with tousled brown hair and glasses slightly askew. He wore jeans and a simple navy sweater with leather elbow patches that somehow didn't look pretentious on him. What struck her most was his smile, open and slightly apologetic. "What's your niece into?" Josie asked, setting aside the closing tasks. "She's turning 12 and loves science, but also stories with strong female characters." He ran a hand through his hair. "I'm Ethan, by the way. Sorry to rush in at the last minute." "I'm Josie." She stepped out from behind the counter. "And you're in luck." "I know exactly what she needs." As she led him toward the young adult section, Josie felt something unexpected, a lightness in her chest, a small spark of possibility. In choosing freedom, she'd made room for genuine connections, even if just for a 5-minute book recommendation to a kind stranger named Ethan. "Genuine connections? You can't be serious," Josie laughed, leaning against the bookshop window. "You've never read Pride and Prejudice?" Ethan grimaced, his hands wrapped around a coffee cup from the cafe next door. "I know it's literary sacrilege. I started it once in college but got distracted by quantum physics textbooks. The eternal battle between Austin and quantum mechanics," Josie teased. "Though I'd argue both deal with the uncertainty principle in their own way." It had been nearly 2 months since Ethan had first stumbled into Foxglove Books looking for his niece's birthday present. What should have been a one-time interaction had evolved into something unexpected when he'd returned the following week, book in hand. "Maddie loved it," he'd said, referring to his niece. "She wants to know if the same person who recommended this has other suggestions." Their conversations had become a weekly ritual. Ethan would stop by near closing time. They'd discuss books and occasionally walk to the cafe next door. Patricia had started giving Josie knowing looks whenever the bell chimed at 5:45 on Thursdays. Today they stood outside the bookshop in the golden late-afternoon light. Josie had learned that Ethan was an environmental engineer who worked for a tech company, though he rarely discussed specifics. He listened intently when she spoke about art and teaching, never interrupting or trying to impress. There was something refreshing about his presence, a calm authenticity she'd never found in Victor's world of power lunches and strategic connections. "I have a confession," Ethan said, interrupting her thoughts. "I've been working my way through your recommendations list. I finished 100 Years of Solitude last night, and..." Josie raised an eyebrow. "It was..." He searched for words, like having a vivid dream that I couldn't quite hold on to after waking. "Beautiful and disorienting." Josie smiled, oddly touched that he'd taken her suggestions seriously. "That's Garcia Marquez for you. Reality and magic so intertwined you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. Like when butterflies follow someone who's in love," Ethan said, referencing the novel. "Do you believe in that kind of love? The transformative kind that bends reality around it?" The question hung between them, heavier than their usual literary discussions. Josie thought about her answer carefully. "I believe in connections that change us," she said finally. "Not the kind that society packages in diamond rings and wedding hashtags, but Something more fundamental. Recognition, maybe. Ethan nodded slowly. I've always thought true connection is when someone sees you clearly. Not who you pretend to be or who they want you to be, but who you actually are. That's rare, Josie said softly, thinking of how Victor had seen only what she could represent for him. A beautiful, accomplished accessory to his success story. It is, Ethan agreed. Then after a pause, would you like to have dinner sometime? Not coffee after your shift, but an actual dinner? The invitation shouldn't have made her nervous. They'd spent hours talking already. But something about formalizing their connection felt significant. Josie hesitated, old fears surfacing. What if this changed everything? What if he was another Victor beneath the unassuming exterior? But looking at Ethan, patiently waiting for her answer. No pressure in his expression. She knew he was different. I'd like that, she said. Their first proper date was at a small Ethiopian restaurant tucked between a laundromat and a vintage record store. No white tablecloths or sommelier, just shared plates of spicy stews and injera bread eaten with their hands. Ethan told her about growing up in Oregon with his environmentalist parents, his work developing water purification systems, and his dream of making sustainable technology accessible globally. What about you? He asked. You've mentioned teaching art, but I sense there's more to your story. Josie took a deep breath. She'd shared little about her past with him, afraid it might change how he saw her. But authentic connection required honesty. There is, she said, and I think I'm ready to tell you about it. Truth and trust. The afternoon sun filtered through the botanical garden's glass ceiling, casting dappled shadows across Josie's face as she finished telling Ethan about her past, her family's financial troubles, Victor's calculated rescue, and her ultimate decision to walk away from wealth and security. So that's my story, she concluded, absently tracing patterns on the wooden bench they shared. Former almost trophy wife, current bookstore clerk, struggling artist on the side. She attempted a light tone, though her heart pounded. She'd never told anyone the full story. Ethan had listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. Now he reached for her hand, his touch gentle. Thank you for trusting me with that, he said. It takes extraordinary courage to choose yourself when everyone expects you to sacrifice for their benefit. His understanding, free of judgment or pity, loosened something in Josie's chest. Over the past month, their relationship had deepened beyond book recommendations and casual dinners. Ethan had become important to her, a partner in meandering conversations, quiet walks, and increasingly, her thoughts about the future. There's something about starting over that clarifies what matters, she said. I'm rebuilding on my own terms now. And how's that going? He asked, genuine interest in his voice. Slowly, she admitted. I've started painting again. Patricia lets me display some pieces in the bookstore. One actually sold last week, a small watercolor of the Oakland Hills. That's wonderful, Ethan said, his enthusiasm evident. I'd love to see your work sometime. You would? Josie couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. Victor had tolerated her art as a quaint hobby, never showing real interest, of course. The way you talk about color and light, I'd like to see the world through your eyes. The moment felt perfect, sitting among exotic plants, connected by honest conversation, and the promise of deeper understanding. Until Josie's phone buzzed with a news alert. Glancing down, she froze. The headline featured a familiar name. Westfield Technologies announces. Breakthrough in affordable water purification. CEO Ethan Westfield pledges 50 $50 to global implementation. Accompanied by a photo of Ethan in a suit, addressing a crowd, Josie stared at her phone. Then at Ethan, the same Ethan who wore faded jeans to their dates, who drove a modest hybrid, who had never once mentioned being the founder and CEO of a billion-dollar company. Josie, what's wrong? He asked, concern furrowing his brow. Without speaking, she turned her phone toward him. Ethan's expression shifted from confusion to recognition, then resignation. You're Ethan Westfield, she said, her voice unnaturally calm. Of Westfield Technologies. He didn't deny it. Yes. Were you ever going to tell me? Yes, he said immediately. I've been trying to find the right moment. The right moment, Josie repeated, standing abruptly. Like perhaps when I was sharing my most vulnerable truths with you? When I was explaining how I left a man who hid his true intentions behind his wealth? Josie, please, it's not the same thing, isn't it? The parallels felt overwhelming. You let me believe you were just an environmental engineer. You let me ramble about my minimum wage job and my struggle to make rent, all while you're worth, what? Billions? I didn't want my company to define our connection, Ethan said, standing too. When people know who I am before they know me, they change. They want something, or they perform. With you, it was just real. Real? Josie laughed bitterly. You built our supposedly real connection on a lie of omission. Not a lie, he insisted. A delayed truth. Everything else, what we've shared, how I feel about you, that's all genuine. Josie wanted to believe him. The past month had been the most authentic relationship she'd ever experienced. But trust once fractured was hard to repair. She'd been fooled before by a man who presented a carefully curated version of himself. I need time, she said finally, gathering her bag. This is too familiar, Ethan. I left my old life because I was tired of half-truths and hidden agendas. I understand, he said quietly. But Josie, please know there's a difference between hiding who you are to manipulate someone and holding back details until trust is established. She paused, struck by the distinction. Was there a difference? Or was she seeing what she wanted to see because her feelings for Ethan ran deeper than she cared to admit? Maybe, she conceded. But I still need space to think. As she walked away, Josie wondered if genuine connection was possible in a world where everyone seemed to wear masks, including, perhaps, herself. A different kind of wealth, 3 weeks of silence stretched between them like an ocean. Josie threw herself into work, painting late into the night in her tiny apartment, trying to process her complicated feelings through brushstrokes and color. She'd created more art in those weeks than in the previous year. Landscapes that bled into abstractions, emotions captured in pigment and water. Patricia noticed the change. Your new pieces have a different quality, she observed one morning as they arranged Josie's latest paintings on the bookstore's feature wall. There's something raw here, powerful. Josie studied the canvas, a sunset where light and shadow battled across an urban skyline. I'm working through some things. Would these things involve a certain Thursday regular who hasn't been around lately? Patricia asked, her directness softened by genuine concern. Josie sighed. He wasn't who I thought he was. Few people are when we first meet them, Patricia replied. The question is whether who they actually are is someone worth knowing. The conversation lingered in Josie's mind as she walked home that evening. She'd spent weeks focusing on Ethan's omission while ignoring the larger truth, that in every interaction, he'd been authentic in ways that mattered. His compassion, his values, his respect for her thoughts and dreams, those hadn't been fabrications. Perhaps, she realized, she'd been so focused on avoiding another Victor that she'd failed to see Ethan clearly. Her revelation came just as the Oakland Arts Festival transformed her neighborhood into a celebration of creativity. Streets closed to traffic became open-air galleries. As she wandered among the displays, a familiar voice called her name. Turning, she saw Ethan standing beside a booth displaying her paintings. Paintings Patricia must have submitted on her behalf. These are extraordinary, he said simply, eyes fixed on her sunset piece. They show how you see the world, both its beauty and its complexity. Josie's carefully constructed defenses wavered. What are you doing here? Patricia told me about the festival. He took a tentative step toward her. I've missed you, Josie. I've missed our conversations, your perspective, the way you make me see things differently. Around them, festival goers milled about, but Josie felt as if they stood in a pocket of stillness. I should have told you sooner about Westfield Technologies, Ethan continued, but I need you to understand something. For years, people have approached me for what I represent: success, connections, resources. With you, I wanted to be valued for who I am, not what I have. Josie recognized the sentiment. Hadn't she walked away from Victor for similar reasons? After you left, Ethan said, I realized I'd made the same mistake by not trusting you with my complete truth. The irony is I withheld information because I was afraid of losing authenticity. But in doing so, I compromised it. His honesty disarmed her. I overreacted, she admitted. I projected my past experiences onto you without giving you the chance to explain. We both made mistakes, he said, relief evident in his expression. The question is, where do we go from here? Josie looked at her paintings, then back at Ethan. I don't know. My life is complicated enough without dating a tech billionaire. What if we simplified things? Ethan suggested. Not by hiding parts of ourselves, but by focusing on what matters, building something meaningful together. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded newspaper article. I saw this and thought of you. The headline read, City Council cuts arts education funding in public schools. These kids deserve the chance to express themselves, Ethan said. To see the world as more than just economic opportunities and competition. They need what you can offer, what we could offer together. What are you suggesting? Josie asked, a foundation, not a charity with your name slapped on it like Victor wanted, but a real initiative to bring arts education to underserved communities. Your vision, your curriculum, my resources to make it happen. The idea resonated deeply, combining her passion for teaching with real impact. Not a return to wealth for its own sake, but a partnership with purpose. Equal partners? She asked, needing to be certain. In every way, Ethan confirmed. I don't want someone who fits into my world, Josie. I want to build a new world with someone who challenges me to be better. 6 months later, the Rivera Westfield Arts Initiative opened its first community studio in Oakland. Children who had never held a paintbrush created vibrant murals alongside retirees discovering art for the first time. Josie taught classes 3 days a week, her own artwork now featured in galleries across the Bay Area. And each evening, she returned to a modest craftsman home she shared with Ethan, a middle ground between her tiny apartment and his former penthouse. Their life together wasn't defined by wealth or status, but by the authentic connection they'd fought to preserve. You know, Ethan said one night as they sat on their porch swing, watching the sunset that so often appeared in Josie's paintings. Most people think wealth is about what you own. And what do you think it is? Josie asked, her head resting on his shoulder. This, he said simply, the freedom to be fully ourselves together. That's the only kind of wealth that matters. Josie smiled, thinking of her journey, from a golden cage to a life rich with possibility. She had chosen freedom, and in doing so found love that valued her authentic self above all else. Not the glittering facade that wealth could buy, but the genuine connection that made life truly worth living.